Welcome to the Criminologist Podcast. Our goal here is to educate and enlighten our listeners, focusing on the latest and greatest evidence-based interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. And not only those factors which drive folks into crime, we also look at the reasons why people exit a life of crime. Also, we attempt to paint an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those involved in the system are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality. This podcast will avoid stereotypes and biases. We will endeavor to accomplish the first two goals in a way that keep you, the listener, interested and even entertained. And now, the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Thank you. Hello, and welcome to episode 42 of the Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. I am thrilled to be joined this week by Mr. Z of Mr. Z Movies fame. Mr. Z has appeared on local radio stations KFAN as well as Cities 97 here in Minnesota. You can follow Mr. Z on Twitter at Mr. Z Movies. He is a veteran of the film industry, so I reached out to him to get his take on the role of media in criminal justice, how both sides of the equation are portrayed in film, for better or worse. And then we have some fun reviewing each other's top 10 list of our favorite criminal justice related films. And those are tougher to do than you think, folks. Mr. Z and I actually have a past, which you will discover during the course of our interview. So let's have a listen to my conversation with Mr. Z, and I will see you all on the other side. Okay, we are taking a little bit of a tangent, which we're all about on the show here this week. We are going to have a little bit more lighthearted, if you will, episode. I am so pleased to be bringing you Mr. Z, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. Suffice to say that Mr. Z and I matriculated years ago at university, and we were just doing the math on this, and it was probably 33 or 34 years since I've seen Mr. Z, and our paths ended up crossing, and I asked him to be on the show to discuss criminal justice in the cinema and movies and media and that kind of thing, which, as you're about to hear when he introduces himself, is his bailiwick. So, Mr. Z, take it away, up to and including. Listeners are probably wondering why I'm referring to you as Mr. Z. So, how are you, friend? Good to see you again.
Hey, great to see you, Joe, or Mr. Arvidsson. The Mr. Z thing sometimes comes across as a little pompous, or it's certainly not meant to be that way. I was given the name I work as a liaison between movie theaters and movie studios. I have for a long time. There's not many of us that do that, but it's a fun profession to be in. And I have been doing some stuff with the radio, with the KFAN network. And a long time ago, they asked me to come on, probably 13 years ago. And I said, I just don't feel comfortable using my real name when I'm talking about movies, because I work with these studios, work directly with people making these movies, and it's also unfair to the people who get paid to do movie reviews, and I'm seeing it before they do. And so they said, okay, don't worry, they won't use a real name. So I call in to talk about Da Vinci Code, whenever that was. That's how long it's been. And they start playing the Mission Impossible music, and they talk about this mysterious Mr. Z, and they gave me that name, and they said they can't say where he's from, and so this character got developed called Mr. Z, the mysterious Mr. Z. And it was never really intended to be that mysterious. It was just I felt more comfortable not using my real name.
Perfect. So we are going to get to, we each put together sort of a top 10 list. But before we get into that, I wanted to get your take on the role that movies or even television play in the public's perception of justice-involved individuals. I'm a big believer, and I want to get your take on this, that I think most individuals, for better or worse, they draw from their favorite movies, crime movies in particular, when reflecting on, again, individuals who've who've been involved in the system. So as a non-CJ practitioner, what are your thoughts on that? Is that the genesis of where not just the layperson, but even policymakers sometimes, sadly, they draw from what they saw in the latest episode of Law and Order or their favorite movie that they saw at the Cineplex with their family, and that's what they base decisions on?
It's certainly, I agree with that. I do agree that exists. I do think, and I think we know this from our viewing, is that we as humans are pretty good at recognizing when something is a story, is fiction. We can watch a movie like, if you watch a Jason movie, a Halloween type movie where the killer's wearing a hockey mask, it's not really that frightening. It can be jump scary and it'll be all kind of stuff. But I think inside we all know this isn't real. It's fake. It's a movie. And deep inside we kind of know that. But what I do agree with is that sometimes you run across a movie where you leave the theater feeling like almost uncomfortable, almost physically ill because the movie was too real. The movie felt like this was too real. And in that situation, we do sometimes do that. For me, the movie, not the scariest movie, but the most disturbing movie that I think I've ever seen in my life was a movie called Seven. If you remember the movie Seven. And it just was, I left that theater. It took me an hour to recover from seeing that movie. And so I guess, I think that most of the time when we're watching movies where we glorify a mobster or whatever, I think we kind of deep inside know that Tony Soprano was actually kind of a bad guy, but we're still rooting for him because it's a show. But every now and then, I think that you can't help it, but I think some of that stuff slips through. The thing I think I wanted to ask you about, because what I've heard is that when you're watching these, especially on TV, but in movies when there's a courtroom it's a courtroom scene, I have heard from different people, lawyers and stuff, that those just aren't the way it goes. It's not, that people aren't constantly standing up and going, objection, and, overruled, and you counselor, one more outburst like that, and you're out of my courtroom, and there's every courtroom scene there, everyone's banging gavels and all this stuff. If one understand, they're usually much more boring than that. That most trials don't turn into the way they appear on TV.
Yeah, it's insane, your point. Even, the more well-respected TV dramas, I'm a huge fan of the original Law and Order, not so much all the spin-offs, but even that, it's like you said, there's so many just blatant procedural things to the point that I almost convinced myself that today's television screenwriters are basing what they know about courtrooms on watching other courtroom TV shows. And it just becomes this sort of incestuous misinformation because it's not fact-based at all. I want to circle back to that in a moment here, but you were mentioning Seven, and all I could think of was What's in the Box. But
yes.
I formerly taught I still teach, but I formerly taught an undergraduate course entitled Criminal Justice in the Media, and it was more a fun look at how, again, media influences people's perception of crime. And I stumbled across an excellent textbook entitled Media, Crime, and Criminal Justice by Ray Surratt. But he does a great job of breaking down how criminals are portrayed in film, and he puts them into three different silos. And he talks first about the psychopath or the super male. And this is, as you said, Jason in the hockey mask, Freddy Krueger, Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which, to your point, okay, I know that's more of a Halloween movie. But again, that's his first cluster of criminals in film is the psychopath. He then talks about what he calls the victims and heroes. And this is where it's the myriad of Robin Hood movies, for example. Or The Mark of Zorro or The Shadow, where you're rooting, for the bad guy as the hero. Or even maybe some more contemporary examples would be Falling Down with Michael Douglas, if you remember that film from the early 90s.
Yeah.
Or even Thelma and Louise, where you're rooting for the hero, right?
Right.
For the criminal's the hero that you root for. And then the third, you mentioned Tony Soprano, Mr. Z. The third category that he came up with was sort of the professional criminal or the businessman criminal. So this would be all of our favorite gangster movies, from Goodfellas and Godfather to Bugsy, And he listed some other sleepers in here as well. The Mechanic from 1972, The Professional with a very, very young Natalie Portman.
Great movie.
Or Thief with James Caan was another great movie again, but you know, The Professional is sort of that's what I do for a living. I wake up and I'm a professional thief, which again is not generally the case. But my earlier contention, the folks sort of draw their conclusions from these three buckets of clients. And I've been in the criminal justice field for, well, the 33 years that we just mentioned. And yeah, I don't see a lot of people in either of these buckets. So, it's a great text for those. I know there's folks in academia, Media Crime and Criminal Justice by Ray Surratt. It's a great textbook to really take a deep dive on this. The other thing he does, and this is where I said I want to circle back to this, Mr. Z, is then he flipped it around and said, well, how are the criminal justice professionals portrayed in film? And we can start with the one you started with already, the court system. With prosecutors, he basically breaks the entire court system down into, people look at films as either judges and lawyers, right?
Right.
And again, something I've never seen, but in films or TV, prosecutors generally don't investigate the crimes. They're presented with evidence and they try a case, but they're not out there on the streets,
right,
solving the crime like Jim Rockford would. And then when he talks about law enforcement in film and television, he saw this theme that essentially to be successful in law enforcement, you've got to break the rules. You've got to buck the system, a la Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood, or Mel Gibson in the Lethal Weapon movies, right, or Die Hard, right? The only successful law enforcement officers are the ones that, again, sort of buck the system. And I can remember growing up, I'll date myself here, watching Starsky and Hutch. And I lost track of how many episodes Starsky and Hutch walked into Captain Dobie's office and turned in their badges and, we can't fight crime this way kind of thing. But you've got to be sort of that anti-establishment guy. And again, that's not how successful law enforcement officers work.
Right. Yeah.
And then the last one he looks at, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was reading that. You know what? My first thought when I was reading that is that exclusive to the criminal justice system? In other words, if when they're making movies, let's say about the movie industry itself, are they accurately portraying? If you're making a movie about making a movie, how accurate are they actually? Or is it, in other words, are movies just inherently where you take a relatively banal subject and you say, let's make this more interesting and more fun because that's entertainment. But that's neither here nor there. That was just kind of an academic thought I had, first of all, but to put it into perspective is that because it is, portrays it negatively, or portrays it incorrectly, let's say, not negatively. So yes, the question is that do they believe what they see in the movies, or do they recognize it as not being true? And that's an important thing to discuss. So.
Mm-hmm. You make a great point there. And when you posed it, I was just asking myself, that's a good point. I mean, if I was asking that same question of the medical profession, would doctors say, or engineers say, no, that's not really accurate.
Yeah.
The third, I'm going to circle back to that myself, because to answer your question, the third sort of clump of how criminal justice practitioners are portrayed, he talks about, the vocation of corrections in film, which I thought he was spot on with this. But for the most part, if you think of every prison movie you've ever seen, you're typically rooting for the inmate. Right. And the prison guards are the sadistic, you-know-whats, right? And we're tending to root for the prisoners, which I thought, how ironic that you could go from watching a movie based on one of those, where you're rooting against the gangsters and the good guy, Dirty Harry to catch the bad guy, or Mel Gibson and Lethal Weapon to catch the bad guy, until they get sentenced in the courtroom where the prosecutor investigates the case. But as soon as that same bad guy gets to prison, now we're rooting for the bad guy, right? Yeah. It's a total 180.
Yeah, that is it.
And again, think of films like Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you.
I was just saying, think of films like.
Yep, I agree with you, and I think that's true. That it is. I used to watch a show called Orange is the New Black on Netflix, which I really enjoyed the first couple seasons. But that is an extreme example where you're absolutely rooting for everyone in the orange jumpsuits, and basically almost everyone's a bad guy that's running that jail system. And so it definitely does. I think that one probably does leave a bad taste in people's mouth. Like, yeah, that's how it is, in prison. I bet you that. So yeah, we do. And I don't know why that is. I guess because, realistically, if you want to make a movie, just if you were going to write a bare skeleton, forget the plot, you would say, take an underdog, put him or her in a situation in which they're probably going to fail, and everyone knows they're going to fail, and then at the end have that person succeed. That is about 90% of movies. And so if you are in a prison system, the people who are the underdogs are the ones who are in jail. You can't make the people running the prison the underdogs. It doesn't work. And so I think that it works so much better as a writer to, it's because the jail the guards get to go home at night. And so it makes them not the underdog. They're clearly the ones with the power. They're the Cobra Kai. And the Karate Kids are all in, and at the very end, they're going to do a crane kick, and they're going to get out. And so most movies have the underdog overcoming whatever the power is at the time. And so yes, I think that we naturally give the prisoners the underdog role, and but it can be switched around when you're not in prison yet. You can give the victim the underdog role because the judge is on the take, and the victim is they're releasing the guy because he's got a bunch of money, and now how is Erin Brockovich going to take care of this, and she's the underdog, and so I think that that's a crutch that a lot of writers lean on is, like I said, take an underdog, put them in a situation in which they just about are going to lose, and then they come back at the end and win.
I love that take on that it's a screenwriter, like you said, the underdog role, because who doesn't root for the underdog? Mm-hmm. And the films that I was going to cite, again, when we think of your typical prison movie, to illustrate this, think of Shawshank Redemption. Think of Clint Eastwood in Escape from Alcatraz, right? The only exception to the rule that I've ever really come up with was Tom Hanks in The Green Mile.
Yeah.
Where the corrections officials were portrayed slightly as the protagonist.
They did. They took all – I had my –
Now, my selfish –
I was going to say, I had my son, what is my son? He just turned 16, and I didn't realize – I hadn't seen Green Mile in a long time. I said, dude, you got to watch Green Mile. And I didn't realize what I was putting him through until I'm watching the end of the movie, and I'm realizing, oh my God, I've seen the movie 10 times, and I'm bawling like a baby, But they take what they did is it's like, okay, we need one bad guy. So they take Percy, and they make him the most hateable character you almost could ever put in any movie, and wrap him all into this one character. So you can put all of your hate on him. And he is like one of the worst people ever to be portrayed. He doesn't put he keeps the sponge dry when when he's in charge of running the electrocution chair, and that horrible scene where the light's on fire and he stomps on Mr. Jingles. Percy, you hate him so much. So they wrapped all of the hatred into that one guard, so the other guards could be nice guys.
Yeah, precisely. When I was doing my research and referencing the book that I just looked at, I saw a little fun fact, and I've already dated myself by saying I grew up watching Starsky and Hutch, but just to give younger listeners an idea of what the television landscape looked like during my formative years, in 1975, 40% of network television, their primetime schedule, contained shows dealing with crime and law enforcement. I mean, it was nothing but Starsky and Hutch, Beretta, Charlie's Angels. That was my Wednesday night lineup growing up as a kid. I still remember to this day.
Well, and
Starsky and Hutch, Beretta, Charlie's Angels.
I wanted to say that we dated ourselves a little bit, because when you mentioned at the beginning Jim Rockford, I just the other day told my wife that the Rockford Files is the greatest opening theme song from any TV show of all time. It's the best. And I was a little kid when Rockford Files was on, but when you're a kid and your parents aren't home and you got to watch something, you watch the Rockford Files, So yeah, I watched all Perry Mason, reruns of Perry Mason, on Channel 11 or whatever at 11 o'clock at night. That's what we watched. Yeah.
And it wasn't just that awesome Rockford Files theme song, but they had that really cool hook of starting every episode with the answering machine where a client or an ex pissed off client was calling Jim to complain about somebody or a bill collector or somebody, and then it was just beep. But every one, it was a new.
It was different. It was different, and then it would go like, and you're just going, yeah, great tune.
I'm gonna have to see if I can't track that down on Hulu or Amazon or something. It's got to be out there somewhere, right?
Yep. Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, let's get to it.
Yeah.
So I challenged Mr. Z to create a top 10 list of his favorite sort of crime and justice movies here. And we were saying before we started recording that it was tough for either of us to get down to the top 10. So, oh boy, why don't we start with some honorable mentions, Mr. Z, because there's just so many. And again, I know when people listen to top 10 lists, don't get too upset, folks. More of this is just think of this as a public service that we're both sharing with you, our vast acumen of crime movies that, again, now in this age of streaming, you can go back and track down. Again, not when like we were kids, Mr. Z, and if it's not playing at the Cine 3 theater anymore, you're SOL. You
just have to wait.
These are all at your fingertips, folks.
Well, one thing I'd like to make.
Why don't you start then with some of your honorable mention?
Sure. I want to make a distinction of between whenever I do it. I've been doing this for a long time, but one of the fun things is that hanging out with movie people, we talk a lot about movies, and there's sort of ground rules in when you're arguing about movies or making a top 10 list. It's strangely enough, because some people claim it's semantics, I claim it's not, that there's a difference between a good movie and a movie that you liked. Those are not necessarily the same things. And so sometimes when you're making a top 10 list, there becomes this area where it's like, some of my movies aren't the top 10 movies for most people, but I have to include it on mine because something happened at a certain point of my life where that's in there. And then some of the other movies are literally our top 10 movies of all time that you can say you could justify by the directing and the film work and the lighting and the acting. And so it's really weird because some people will say, I saw that movie, it's a terrible movie, I don't like it. And it's like, well, no, those are two different things. Terrible movie, didn't like it, two different things. Which one was it? Because there's some really good movies that some people just don't like. And there's some horrible movies, I mean, I grew, my college career was watching trauma films, watching Toxic Avenger and Class of Nukem High, and I loved those movies. Am I going to argue with somebody that those are good movies? I don't think I'm going to win that one, but I'm going to say I love watching Toxic Avenger in college was a blast. So anyway, I only have a couple. I had a couple that I had to cross off and replace. I have Heat as an honorable mention with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. It should probably be in my top 10 list because there are movies. It really should be, but I just couldn't do it. I haven't seen it since I saw it in the theaters. And then the other one that I really wanted to put in my top 10 list, but the only reason it's there is for the last 5 minutes of the movie, and that's Primal Fear with Edward Norton and Richard Gere. If you remember, the split personality thing and the ending, the last 5 minutes of that movie, it's a completely forgettable movie until the last 5 minutes of that film. And then probably, a movie like Dead Man Walking, which was a very powerful movie. And, it's just hard for me to put it in my top 10 because I just don't think I could watch it again because it's just it was just too emotionally draining for me watching Dead Man Walking. So those are three of my honorable mentions.
So when you mentioned Heat, which is on my list, that did make my top 10 list.
It should. I
love that movie, Heat.
Yep.
So to a reflection of my borderline obsession with Heat, I stumbled across a podcast called One Heat Minute. And the producers and the host of this podcast, what they do is they kick off every episode of their podcast by playing 1 minute of the movie Heat, and then they discuss it for the next 45 minutes, up to and including Mr. Z. So if you remember the movie, there's the great scene with De Niro's character when he's going to steal the ambulance for the heist, but he's posing as an ambulance driver. So he walked through the hospital and, the credits are rolling. It's shot at night in LA. It's very beautiful, but it's several minutes long. Suffice to say, the first 3 or 4 episodes of this podcast, they're just talking about the credits of the movie. But then, and then the other thing is it's a long movie. It's close to a 3-hour movie. Yeah. So do the math on that. There's about 180 episodes here, but it's so fun when they get into those action scenes and they would, again, just nerd out on 1 minute of the movie for an entire podcast. Yeah. So if you're out there and you're a Heat fan, track down a podcast called One Heat Minute. It was just amazing.
That is cool. I agree with you, Joe, that it should be in my top 10, but because I literally haven't seen it since 95 or 96 when it came out, I was like, I don't know that I can make a good argument, and so I'm going to have to leave it off because I haven't seen it in so long. So, but I agree, it is a top 10.
So I'm going to do this. I had more of what I'm calling honorable mentions only because, I had some solid top 10s and I just wanted to get these out even again for folks to track down. I'll read like 5 of them, Mr. Z, and we can get your, feedback, and then I'll do my other 5 and then we'll get into our respective top 10. So in no particular order, but again, not making my list. Only God Forgives with Ryan Gosling. The Long Good Friday, which is an old Bob Hoskins British gangster movie. A Dangerous Year, which I just watched on Netflix. Good Time, starring Robert Pattinson. Have you seen any of those, or did any of those resonate with you?
No, I saw Long Good Friday when it came out. But that's one of the problems that in my business is that I see about 70 movies a year. For the last, 25 to 30 years. And so I've seen over 2,000 films, I estimated recently. And so there's a lot of movies that I see, and then I just have to, I do what I have to do for my job. And if they don't jump out at me really hard and grab me, then I remember them, but I can't really discuss them educated. So I do kind of, so there's a lot of movies that have come and gone in my brain.
Then the other ones, just real quick, that didn't kind of crack my top 10, but I wanted it out there. And these are some good films here. Donnie Brasco, Casino.
Casino's great.
The Craze, which is a fantastic, Casino's great. The Craze, which is the true story of a couple of gangsters in the UK. And you know what? I had at number 11, The Departed here.
Oh yeah, I forgot about Departed. When I was narrowing it down, right. I liked The Departed. Obviously, there's some movies that the acting is just so strong that you just and Departed is one of those movies where there's almost no bad scenes in that movie. There's every single scene is a winner in a movie like that. Cause most movies that aren't, a lot of movies you can pick up one scene where it's like, you know what I didn't like? I didn't like when that one character did this because it doesn't make sense. Cause all along she had been doing this and then it's out of her character that she did that. But then we forgive it and say, well, whatever. And then like we say, when you have good movies, not a movie you liked, but a good movie, that never happens. It's where you can't find one time where the writer made an error and the character did something out of character. And Departed would be one of those films.
Yeah, beautiful acting, and again, just they chew the scenes up, all those actors. My only knock on that was there were a few of what I call my yeah right moments, whereas I'm watching the film like, yeah right, they would have known that was this person, or they would have called the police by now, or yeah right, you don't have gunshots in your neighborhood that you don't, but you just had to kind of forgive it because it's such great acting and storytelling, So
you forgive them. You forgive them their mistakes because it's like, well, they must have had a reason, so I'm going to let it go.
All right. So what did you have at your number 10? 2,
3, 4, 5, 6. So Primal Fear's crossed off. Heat. Okay. The starting, I'm going to start with some of the ones that I'm not going to proclaim are the top 10 of all time, but they're in my top 10. And I want to start with Richard Jewell from 2019. That might be that movie. That movie had, I think, the best acting of any movie from 2019. I think Paul Walter Hauser should have been nominated for an Oscar. I think Kathy Bates. You talk about that movie, even though you knew the beginning and middle and end of that movie. Paul Walter Hauser was so powerful. And as far as the kind of the point of your podcast, this is clearly an interesting situation in which this really happened, where the justice system. No, I'm not saying it was portrayed accurately. I don't know that, but the criminal justice system really wanted Richard Jewell to be, the bomber, and you just felt so bad for the guy. He kept saying, well, I'm one of you, I'm a police officer too, So I loved Richard Jewell. I loved the acting. That's my number 10.
Love it. I had at my number 10 a foreign film, I believe. It was so good that I don't remember if I was reading subtitles or not, called A Prophet.
Didn't see it.
A Prophet is a great movie. I like watching, I don't want to call them foreign films because I know that turns a lot of people off. Even if it's a movie taking place in Scotland or Australia, just seeing the different nuanced cultural differences that you pick up on in addition to the great storytelling. Like, oh yeah, they're whatever, driving on the different side of the road, or can buy beer on Sundays, or this or that. Well, A Prophet is the movie. It takes place in I want to say it takes place in France, and the protagonist is a young Algerian who kind of is brought up in the juvenile justice system for petty crimes, and he graduates to his first adult prison. And within the prison, we quickly see that the cliques, if you will, are broken down to the Corsicans and the Algerians. And the Corsicans, because they're into organized crime, they have all the connections with the guards and the smuggling drugs, so they basically run the prisons. And, the Algerians are looked down on. And you just sort of juxtapose that to the American prison system, where the prison gangs all are formed along racial lines and, that kind of thing. But it's just a different take on, again, correctional justice in another country. And I don't want to spoil the movie because it's really good, but it's sort of this young protagonist journey, through prison and sort of climbing the ranks. But, check it out, listeners, if you get a chance. It's called A Prophet. Great film.
Yeah, I'm not too proud. I decided after all these times, when I haven't seen a movie, I just say, nope, never saw it. And, but I just wrote it down, and I'm going to, hopefully take a look at it. All right. My number 9. And again, I threw this one popped into my head. I don't know if it belongs in my top 10, and it's sort of the trilogy of the 3. It's a documentary called Paradise Lost. Which is basically the trial of the West Memphis 3. Mm-hmm. And I was completely taken with that documentary. I couldn't take my eyes off it. And I was by the end, when the movie ends, I don't, spoiler alert, but at the end of the movie, you're kind of left with, they're in jail. I don't think they did it, and then of course later they make part 2, and it's documentaries. When documentaries are good, they're really good. And they ended up making all 3, Paradise Lost 1, 2, and 3. Where basically for people who don't know, the setting is, it's a true story, a horrifying crime that happened to some second grade boys that were devastating crime against them. And there were 3 young men in town who were kind of known for wearing black, listening to Ozzy Osbourne, drawing pentagrams on the back of their jeans jacket. And that was kind of what they did wrong. And that was mostly what people had against them. And they ended up watch it. It's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable movie to watch about that, if it's accurate, really when this kind of went wrong as far as I'm concerned. But you can't stop watching. Couldn't tear my eyes away. Wonderful film.
Yeah, I saw the first one when it first came out, which was a while back now, and you're right. The mark of a good documentary. I was pissed off. You're
Yes.
pissed off when you watch the first one.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
All right. My number 9, I have a fun little film out of the UK called Sexy Beast.
Oh, yeah.
Which is
I know
a
that.
horrible title.
Who is in it? I can't remember the name of the lead actor.
Ray Winstone and Ben Kingsley just chews up the scene as being the bad guy, the over the top gangster Ben Kingsley.
Yep.
Like I said, don't let the title throw you. It's essentially a jewel heist movie, taking place in the UK, and the Ben Kingsley character is a gangster, sort of the chieftain who talks Ray Winstone coming out of retirement in Spain to come back to London to pull a jewel job or a bank job or whatever it is. But it's just kind of a good old fashioned gangster movie. And again, I talked earlier about how I love watching films, learning about other cultures, just again, the subtle nuanced stuff of how gangsters, speak and talk and interact in British cinema vis-a-vis American cinema. I just thought was great.
Yeah, and you're right. And Ben Kingsley, that was a great. I mean, he might have even been nominated for that for some awards. But he does chew the scenery. He's over the top, but it works completely. So yes, I kind of there's so many movies that I totally forget until somebody brings them up, and I'm like, oh my god, I forgot about that movie. So yeah, that's a good one. Let's see, where are we? We're on number 8. This one is it's hardly even fair because it's probably the most commercial film on my list, but it's Ocean's 11, not the original, but the remake. And Ocean's 11 was, to me, I don't know whether it was a great movie or not, but I had such a ball watching that film, watching the slow setup, watching all the characters. And even though the all acting was swear that half the movie was done like where they're winking at the camera half the time. But to me, I enjoyed that movie so much. I see most of the movies by myself. I enjoyed that movie enough to where that weekend, me and my wife were going out to watch a movie with another couple. And I said, you guys, we got to go to Ocean's 11. And I watched it again because I wanted them to see it. So I have Ocean's 11 on my list.
Another fun movie, like you said, Ocean's 11. And I previously talked about my sort of yeah, right rule when I'm watching certain films. But to your point, there was so much of that sort of wink and a nod going on that it was all about yeah, right. You just had to sort of suspend disbelief and jump on the roller coaster and have a good time, with the gang. So yeah, fun film. My number 8, is a movie called City of God.
Yep, I know it.
Okay. It takes place in the slums of Rio de Janeiro. I liked it because it's, for lack of a better terms, it's sort of epic. You're seeing this sort of journey that these kids go on, starting out in the slums of Rio de Janeiro, and their sort of ascent into the organized crime world of Rio. Again, I just like watching films where you see that type of character development and people's trajectories. You know, regular listeners of the podcast, we talk about how folks, their trajectories that take them out of crime, this process known as desistance. Well, I like watching films, you know, because I always tell those I train and my students that, you know, nobody wakes up one day and says, I'm going to be an arch criminal today. Or if you were to visit a 6th grade class, say, hey, raise your hand if you want to report to a probation officer Sunday, right?
Okay.
There's this evolution taking place. And, you know, this is I thought a real accurate portrayal of that evolution of how folks, you know, they sort of dabble in delinquency as kids. And this is true in real life. You know, nobody wakes up one day and says, today I'm going to commit a major felony. No, today I'm going to skip school. Today I'm going to break my curfew. Today I'm going to maybe dabble in delinquency. And then, you know, that might end up with a juvenile probation placement. And then you graduate to the adult system and you go from probation to prison to parole, you know, kind of thing. But it's, again, not like how in some films it's just, well, I was thrust into these circumstances where I had to kidnap somebody or rob a bank, whatever. So,
right.
And again, if you haven't picked up in the theme here yet, I just love watching other cultures. City of God is a great movie. Takes place down in like I said, in Rio de Janeiro.
Yes. City got another award-winning film. So yeah, I guess I feel most of my movies have been not nearly as cool as your movies have been. But I'm going to get one off the list that we already talked about. This is my number, what are we on, 7? And that would be Green Mile. Because Green Mile is, I mentioned I have my 16-year-old son watch it, and I was watching it with him, and I kind of forgot how magical it was, and I realized that there's some tropes that they use in the movie that maybe they wouldn't do if they made it in 2021 and a few other things, but I loved the when, if you remember the book, Stephen King released that he did that where he released one chapter separately as a book, like each month a different one got published. So you had to read the little mini book and then wait for the couple of weeks to go buy the next one. And I did it. I bought all the books and I loved it. And I really like the movie is just, it's a classic Tom Hanks movie that moves me emotionally. Even though it's certainly not set in reality. But yet it sort of is, if that makes any sense. That it's that touch of magic that adds it to make it a little more spectacular. But I stand by the fact that I love Green Mile, and it's in my list.
Yeah, no apologies here. So my number 7, we've talked about already too. I had Heat at number 7.
Sure.
I talked about the podcast briefly. One of the things I liked about Heat, and we were talking about this previously on this episode when we were saying, the irony of folks rooting for the cops in one movie, but then as soon as that same individual goes to prison, they become the hero. I think this film did a great job of, and this is a Michael Mann film, Michael Mann does a great job of walking that tightrope where, and I know you said you didn't see it since it's theatrical release, but you're rooting for both camps. You're rooting for the gangsters when they're doing their gangster stuff. And then when it goes to Pacino and his ultra cool cops with their $3,000 suits, you're rooting for the ultra cool cops to catch them. So Michael Mann pulls off the rare feat of, he's just not all in with one camp or the other. You're kind of rooting for both. It's just a fascinating kind of character study. Yeah.
Yeah, he did a great job with that. And you know what I found over the course of the years of discussing movies is that hardcore movie fans love Heat. There are people who are, like people who don't like to think too much, and I'm one of them. I'm on both sides. I love my hardcore movies, and I also like Jurassic Park. So I like all kinds of movies. But if you're a hardcore movie fan, Heat is always on their list, and not just of movies based around the criminal justice system, just of all time. That Heat is considered, and those two are in their prime with Pacino and De Niro in their acting prime. And they didn't think they overacted that much. So yeah, Heat was, Heat is absolutely one of those movies that movie people love. All right. Well, I'm just going to, I guess I will roll on if we're done with that. I'm going to pull out a movie that I wasn't sure if it belonged on the list or not, but I think that this movie is criminally underrated. Haha, get it? I didn't mean to do that. There's a movie called Shutter Island with Leo DiCaprio. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but I loved Shutter Island. In second and third viewings, I found some faults in the movie, but when I originally saw Shutter Island, I loved every single minute of that entire movie, and the ending worked on me. It's set kind of in that 40s or 50s noir setting, like the whole black and white feel, and he's going there to solve a mystery of a missing prisoner on this island. And there's so many weird things that he encounters between the wardens and the guards and the prisoners themselves. But I bought it, and I love that movie.
Ironically, when you mentioned that upon second and third viewings, you saw some faults, I had kind of the opposite reaction where upon first viewing, I was kind of like, meh, it's okay. I mean, I love DiCaprio. It's all right. But watching it on cable or whatever, second, third viewings, then I came to appreciate it even more.
Yeah.
I just wasn't getting it the first time maybe or whatever, but I really appreciated it on the second and third viewings. I think it sunk in more. I think I was overthinking it the first time.
Yeah.
And I just had to let it.
Who knows? But yeah, it was
experience it.
Yeah. I watched it the second time, and I think, it was one of those movies, sometimes you get excited about a movie, and I brought it home, I'm like, I was talking to my wife, I'm like, you gotta watch this movie, And she was very overwhelmed, and so you almost feel disappointed when you're like, really, you didn't like it as much as I did. That's so maybe I didn't like it as much as I thought. I don't know, who knows? But same thing happened with Inception. After I saw Inception, I just came running and said, "Oh, you wait till you see Inception," and she was like, "Yeah, it's all right," and I'm like, come on, it's Inception. It's one of the best movies of all time. So, but yes, anyway, so there. She's what I would certainly think she's a very good movie viewer and a good movie critic. So she keeps me honest. So, but anyway, nonetheless, so yeah, Shutter Island is on my list.
I almost thought about putting Inception on my list, but I didn't know if it qualified as a crime movie. But you're right, a great film.
Yeah. Well, Christopher Nolan is famous for being really a snob and an elitist, and but you know what? As it turns out, during this whole this whole silly, how do I call this? This shutdown of the entire film industry for an entire year, he's been one of the leaders in helping us bring this back to say, I'm not making movies for TV. You're not putting my films on TV. I mean, that's not what I do as an artist. So screw you. And he left Warner Brothers and is going to go somewhere else. So Nolan is obviously, if it's funny because when I list my top 20 movies of all time, 2 of them would be Nolan, at least 2 of them, and one would be Inception, the other would be Memento, which I considered putting on this list because I didn't remember if that but I decided not to, but I loved Memento. Memento was such a brilliant, at one point I thought I might write a film and I might write a movie script, and then I saw Memento and I put away my pen and I said, I can't write this. I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I'm done. I'm just going to sell. I'm going into a different way in the industry. So set my pen down and moved on.
Yeah, I saw Memento in the theater, and that was one where you walk out of the theater, and it was just like, wow. Like the look on everybody's faces was like, wow, I can't believe what I just saw.
Yeah.
I had at my number 6, Taxi Driver.
Oh, wow. Forgot about Taxi Driver. Yes.
Some themes here with directors and actors. I actually saw Taxi Driver. Did you take theater class?
Yeah, with Ron Perrier.
In college. And
Wasn't it?
Yeah,
Ron
That's why
Perrier.
I saw Taxi Driver for the first time.
Funny. That was a great class.
Yeah.
Sitting in the big auditorium.
Was it? Which is why we took it. You got to watch a movie every once a week and then talk about it and sit in the big auditorium.
Yeah.
One of my biggest takeaways from that class was, and I'm sure you remember this as well, he taught us never leave a movie before all the final credits are done rolling.
No. Oh yeah, that was always on his test.
He cited Apocalypse Now as an example, and he said, people that got up right away when they thought the credits started rolling on Apocalypse Now, they didn't see the village get blown up. And now it's kind of a hokey thing in the Marvel universe or the whatever to, insert little funny scenes through the credits. But, normally credits roll, the film was over, but he taught us never leave before the credits are done rolling. So yeah, that's why I saw Taxi Driver. I just loved it for, its grittiness and again, sort of the de-evolution is not the word I'm looking for, but the unwinding of De Niro's character in his slow downward spiral of just sort of the everyman taxi driver who's just, he sort of gets chewed up by the system, but then the way that, speaking of the media, he gets portrayed as the hero at the end that saves Jodie Foster. When, if you look a few scenes earlier, this is the same guy that was trying to assassinate the presidential candidate. So again, I appreciated it for how, we sort of can look at how media and perceptions can frame who's a good guy, who's a bad guy, and it's just so contextual. Yeah.
Taxi Driver, that, and when I think of Taxi Driver, immediately I think of the guy who did try to shoot the president to impress Jodie Foster after seeing Taxi Driver. So that was when real life imitating art. But it's funny because by the time I saw Taxi Driver, it had almost become, I had seen so many people make fun of the "you talking to me" scene that it almost, watching that scene, which was a very powerful scene, I'm sure at the beginning, to me it was like a Saturday Night Live sketch, because he's going, "You talking to me," and I had seen so many parodies of that by the time I got around to seeing Taxi Driver. So I think I would have, if I had seen it in the theater, which I did not, it would have been way more powerful by the time I saw it. So, all right.
What's your 5?
Number 5, I'm going to go with Goodfellas at number 5. Goodfellas is just one of those movies. I've probably seen Goodfellas 4, 5, 6 times. Now the last third of the movie falls off a tiny bit, but the first 2/3 of that movie are brilliant. And you want to talk about rooting for bad guys. There are so many bad guys in this film, and Ray Liotta is not a good guy. And the funniest thing is when you think of that movie, one of the first things you think of that movie is Joe Pesci's character, who's an awful character in Goodfellas. We think about the clown scene, oh my, you're a clown. And that's a classic scene. I can watch just that scene on YouTube and it still is an amazing scene to watch Ray Liotta apologize or the "you should go get your shine box" when Billy Batts tells Pesci to go get a shine box, and he leaves and then he comes back and they just beat the tar out of Billy Batts and kill him, and then they have to go bury him. And again, it's weird because this is all happening, but you're rooting for them to succeed for some reason in this film, even though when they do these awful things, you're like, these are horrible, horrible people, but everyone's horrible in Goodfellas. So it's, but I love that movie. And I don't think that I'm going way out on a limb by putting Goodfellas in my list. So.
You are not. If people have been paying attention, I haven't said Goodfellas yet, so spoiler alert. I had at my number 5, Reservoir Dogs, Quentin Tarantino's first feature film, actually, which I caught and recognized his talent before he changed the world with Pulp Fiction. I saw this, again, released on a shoestring budget, convinced these great actors to be in the film, and just you got to see a glimmer of his brilliance back then with Reservoir Dogs, just with the dialogue. I think people always think of Tarantino as a great director, but that man can write screenplays and specifically write dialogue like nobody can. So I had Reservoir Dogs coming in at number 5.
I totally forgot about Reservoir Dogs. And it probably should have been on my list. I'm trying to, I just drew a blank on another movie that's not on my list, and it's driving me nuts that I can't remember the name of the movie. And I'm hoping I can come up with it here really quick. Because it's not on my list. Oh, it's probably on maybe it's on your list. So, all right, so my number 4.
I was going to say quick, speaking of drawing I was just going to say quick, Mr. Z, speaking of drawing a blank, when you were saying something earlier, it didn't make my list, but I don't have Casino on my list, and that should be on my list somewhere.
I did. Casino is, to me, it's...
Go ahead at number 4.
I agree. Casino is funny because the problem I think with Casino is, for me, it's a little bit not as good as Goodfellas, and it's a little bit, so it's almost, some people will say it's better than Goodfellas. I don't buy it. So that's but I loved Casino. It was filmed at the Riviera, which I used to stay at back in the olden days. So number 4, I have 7. The movie 7 with Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, and Kevin Spacey and Gwyneth Paltrow. I think most people have seen it. The 7 deadly sins in which the murderer goes out and kills people using those seven deadly sins of gluttony and sloth and lust and all that stuff. The scenes, to me, they were so well. I don't know whether we're well done accurately, but if their point was to disturb me as a viewer and to make me feel like this was really happening and how horrifying it was, it worked on me. I was, and then of course the famous ending scene. It might seem ridiculous if you watch that scene just alone. It might seem like Brad Pitt is overacting, but I think in the concept of the whole movie, I think that his reaction was 100% justified. And Kevin Spacey played that scene so well, and Morgan Freeman, who's brilliant. I mean, and everything. To me, 7 always has been and will be in my top 10 list of all time of all movies, not just any movie.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, I loved it. I love David. I believe that was David Finch.
Yes, it was Fincher.
Who's the director? David. I'm going to mispronounce the last name.
Fincher.
Yeah. So here it gets tough because again, this is almost like a 4-way tie for first place for me. and I just referenced this movie, but I coming in number 4, Pulp Fiction, which I think really just changed the way that a lot of people make movies. You've seen other films. I mean, if imitation is the highest or, type of flattery or whatnot, you've seen folks now do that sort of non-chronological approach to storytelling in film, which I'm not saying Tarantino necessarily invented it, but he was really the one that did it to such great effect with Pulp Fiction, where he was just telling the multiple stories at the same time. And again, I've referenced his ability to write just fantastic dialogue, and even the more nuanced stuff. If you think about the scenes between Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta, do you know what they call the Burger King in France, type conversations. Because again, if you think of a lot of gangster movies too, then it was sort of this us them, like, well, no, they don't talk like us, they don't act like us, though they're a different breed. It's like, no, they talk just like us. They talk about what they call a Burger King and McDonald's, or so-and-so's cheating on so-and-so's wife, or, they have these sort of conversations, and then they go and do a drug deal or whatever. So in a weird way, it's sort of, humanized them, and maybe that's why we root for them. It's like, oh, they're not this separate, super full-time criminal. They have the same sort of experiences that we do, where they talk about the same kind of weird, you would never see that in a gangster movie 20, 30 years before that. You would never see in, The Godfather, for example, Michael Corleone talking about, they've got the metric system in Europe, so they can't call it a quarter pounder or whatever,
Right.
They don't have those kind of conversations. And that was Tarantino's brilliance with that film. Yeah. So I had Pulp Fiction at my number 4.
I would agree. I thought of Pulp Fiction, and I was trying to remember how I could work it into the theme. And obviously Pulp Fiction is brilliant. I mean, the writing, the way, like you said, the way it's threaded together, and the way it all pulls together at the end, and all of these stories kind of all come together, and weird timelines and all that stuff. Yes, it's a brilliant film, and I mean, you're into the movie when the Samuel Jackson is doing the "say what" again, that whole bit there where he's in the with those college kids basically, and he's like, "Say what again?" And the guy says, "What?" And I'm like, there isn't every scene. Sorry, a quick little sidebar. I'm assuming you're a Simpsons fan. The show The Simpsons. Did you ever see the episode, the 22 short films about Springfield, where they basically do a playoff of Pulp Fiction? That is nearly as brilliant as Pulp Fiction itself, because it's the whole thing is there's even a guy in a gimp mask locked in a trunk in that episode. So, but yes, Pulp Fiction, undeniably brilliant film. All right, well, let's.
I have to make a note of that episode so I can track it down.
Oh, it's so good! It's probably my second favorite Simpson episode after the episode called Homer's Enemy, where Frank Grimes comes to work at the nuclear plant. Is my favorite episode of all time. So, all right, my number 3. And this is weird again, like to say this is number 3 is a little ridiculous, but because it should be number 1, but it's number 3. It's Shawshank Redemption. Morgan Freeman and Tim Roberts. Every single minute, every single scene of that movie is works. And they take their time, and Morgan Freeman kind of narrating the movie, gives it a certain quality. And I'll just say maybe one of my, we talk about how important music is to movies, and music is very important to you, whether it's a soundtrack or whether it's music that's in a movie. And one of my favorite scenes of all time of any movie ever made is when Tim Roberts locks himself in the warden's office, and he plays Mozart's a symphony from Mozart, and Morgan Freeman's saying, "I don't know what those two women were singing about. I'd like they were to think they were singing about freedom and all this stuff." And that music is so beautiful, and his narration over the top of that, and how the entire prison system all shuts down. They basically all stand still and look up and listen to the music while the warden's beating on the door. That scene is one of my favorite scenes of any movie ever made. And just everything about that movie, I love. And of course, again, I'm not stepping out on a limb. Anyone listening is going to be going, okay, we all get it. Everyone loves Shawshank Redemption. So yes, but that's number 3 for me.
Somehow Shawshank Redemption wasn't on my radar, but you're right. That deserves to be in my top 10 for all the reasons you just cited. I actually read that Stephen King novella when it came out. And like you said, just a beautifully told story. I had a train of thought on Shawshank. It'll come back to me. But yeah, that should have been on my list, and it's not. Oh, I know what it was. You were saying earlier the difference between how you define a good film, your favorite film, and you referenced that there's some films that, for example, I saw Schindler's List at the theater, but I'm not going to watch Schindler's List over and over and over again. Doesn't mean it's not a great movie. But there's some films that just have this sort of watchability to them that when it's a Saturday afternoon and I'm folding laundry and I just want to turn on TBS or USA Network to watch some no-brainer, that's where you get like The Casino, or to your point, I'll watch Shawshank a million times over and over and over again. Yeah. Because it's got that high watchability, and it's just, again, so well made. For some reason, as I know I'm preaching to the choir on this, didn't kill it at the box office and wasn't even really critically acclaimed when it first came out, but just kind of picked up steam in video rentals and word of mouth, and now it's just such a huge fan favorite. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption. That was the original title of the story.
Right. I just think back on even let's say the second. People remember. We remember the main characters, but when Red, is that his name? Red. Not Red. Red is Morgan Freeman's character. When what's the name of the guy who gets released? I can't remember his name, but anyway, he ends up going out and he's trying to make it in the real world. He's got his parole. He's working at the grocery store and he's asking boss, can I go to the bathroom? And they're like, you don't have to ask it. And he ends up going and hangs himself, and he writes, something was here. Brooks was here.
So-and-so was there.
Brooks was here. He writes in the wood. So, and then he hangs himself, and you're like, man, that's a bummer. The guy was so used to prison, and he just didn't know how to function anymore in the outside world, and he hung himself, and it's like, that's it. And that's just one little tiny part of this fantastic movie. So yeah, wonderful film.
Yeah, great illustration of prisonization, and not to, get away from the fun we're having talking about movies, but there's a lot of movement afoot about really taking a longer look at these lengthy, prison sentences, which, as that film illustrated, it gets to a tipping point of punishment and reform that it's just turns into this sort of mass incarceration factory. I almost thought, here, I'll just say my number 3 and then you'll know what I'm talking about later. At number 3, I had Godfather Part 2. And I'll just say it. At number 2, I had Godfather. I was going to say I almost clustered these two together and as one film, but I couldn't do that. And I just think they're the greatest. They're not my number 1, but just great storytelling, and the novel was great, the films were great, and just the portrayals were great. And again, like you said earlier, some of these films would be on your top 10 of all time list. I could put The Godfather in my top 5 of all time, or maybe they would, even one of Godfather 1 make the top 3. I just thought, again, a great job of you're rooting for these bad people who do bad things.
It was
just a great portrayal. I just loved Godfather.
It was one of the first. It was the movie that sort of set up so many movies. It was taking, instead of the whole gangster, the style of the 50s and 60s, where Francis Ford Coppola took it and gave us this really long, really slow set of films, Godfather 1 and Godfather 2, which I do sort of hook together, because at one point they released a cut in which Godfather 1 and Godfather 2 were put together in order, so that I know, but I've seen, it's such a good movie that after seeing Godfather and Godfather 2 like 7 times, that watching it that way was kind of a fun new way to watch it. But nonetheless, I agree with you. There's no question that changed movies.
Mm-hmm. So, were you at your 2 or 3? I kind of leapfrogged because I had to sort of cluster Godfather 1 and 2 together.
Yeah, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a shortcut here because my number 3 was Shawshank. And then we talked a little bit about I did clump, and my number 1 was Godfather. I just put Godfather. I didn't have Godfather 2 separated on here.
Okay.
So Godfather's my number 1. So all I have left is my number 2. And so I'll do my number 2.
Okay, got it.
Okay, my number 2, and wouldn't this be weird if we both had this movie on that remaining on our list? But my number 2 film is, and it's maybe the movie that changed. It turned me into a movie person. It changed the way I watched movies for the rest of my life. I don't know how old I was. I was 19 or 20, and I watched A Clockwork Orange. And that was it was so disturbing. It was funny, and it was painful, and it was scary, and it was sad, and it was like you hated Malcolm McDowell, but yet you also kind of rooted for him, and it was weird. And then when they had him in the, they held his eyes open with the little pinchery things and had to put drops in his eyes, and they were having him reform by making him sick when he sees violence and all of this stuff, and then he gets back out, and he's the movie. I didn't know they could make movies like that. I had grown up watching Smokey and the Bandit and Jaws and all of these movies, and I didn't realize that you could make a movie like this that was so different and so weird and so disturbing, and the music was so good that by the end of the movie, I felt like I had done an athletic event when the movie was over. And I realized this is different. This changed everything for me with movie watching. That's when I started watching movies differently. And so I have Clockwork Orange at my number 2.
Yeah, you know what? I'm ashamed of myself that I didn't have Clockwork Orange. I just totally forgot about it, but you're right. And I reference Clockwork Orange in the work I do because it's just, brilliant. Like you said, exploring some of those things. I can't listen to Singing in the Rain to this day because of that movie.
Yes, absolutely.
You know the scene I'm talking about.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, I should have had Clockwork Orange on my list here. In fact, I used to reference Clockwork Orange in some of my undergraduate classes. So yeah, brilliant film. My number 1 we've already talked about, and I kind of struggled with this, and I threw it in there because I just love it. I had Goodfellas at number 1.
Sure.
Which we don't have to rehash a lot, but again, just a great, a great film, great storytelling. I'm a huge Scorsese fan. In fact, as I look at my list, I've got a lot of Scorsese and Tarantino and De Niro here, but yeah, I just love Goodfellas.
Yep,
I just love Goodfellas.
I agree with that. But like I said, yeah, if I read to this list tomorrow, they would be a lot of the same movies, but they would be in a different, who knows what order they would be in. So, I remembered the movie that I forgot to put on my list, by the way. And that is, again, maybe it's because of the ending.
What was it?
Maybe it's because of the ending, and I'm a sucker for surprise endings, but we haven't discussed Usual Suspects yet, which is a great drama. So, Verbal Kent, Kaiser Soze, Usual Suspects. Before we have everyone listening to this yelling at us that we didn't talk about Usual Suspects, I wanted to bring it up. The Usual Suspects.
How did we both forget the Usual Suspects? You're right.
Well, it was when you were talking about Reservoir Dogs. The first thing that pops in my head, and probably the first thing that pops into most people's head when you mention Reservoir Dogs, is the Stuck in the Middle with You scene. Where he's dancing around the guy playing Stuck in the Middle, cutting off parts of his body, and that reminded, all of a sudden, what popped into my head was Kaiser Soze leaving the police office at the end with a limp. And then walking, and then slowly but surely, as it gets pieced together, his limp goes away, and he starts walking faster and faster. And I'm like, "Oh my god, what a great film!" I don't know how great of a film it was, but it's a memorable film with that. That is definitely a must-see film.
I saw The Usual Suspects when it was released in theaters, had limited release, and here in Minneapolis, it was released at I want to say the Lagoon or the Uptown. But it was the first time I went to a movie, not a play, but a movie where at the conclusion of the movie got a standing ovation. And I'm looking around at everybody like, you're clapping at a movie screen. These actors can't hear you. But that was the response it evoked from the audience. It was insane. Yeah.
Yeah. That was it. Brilliant film.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our top 10 list. Mm-hmm. Track these down, ladies and gents, if you haven't heard them. Mr. Z, it was great connecting with you again after 30 some odd years.
Yeah, long time.
We'll have to do it again. Anything you want to, I know you've got a podcast as well. If you want to go ahead and plug that, as they say, or anything else you want to,
sure. Well, right now our podcast is
before we sign off.
Yeah, our podcast is on hiatus. It has been because we record a podcast called Movies Over Easy that slowly fizzled away because we're just trying to do it. It just didn't work out. And it's been sort of, been hard on me. I mean, I don't think I'm ashamed to say that when you devote 30 years of your life to an industry and all of a sudden you're shut down for a whole year, it's hard mentally, on your, as we every week not sure if our company's going to make it or not, and so I didn't really, so we decided, listen, we need to, maybe take a break because talking about movies every week was getting, it was constantly what's getting canceled, what's getting moved. And so, but we look forward to bringing back Movies Over Easy when the time comes. So,
well, when you do, let me know. In the meantime, my listeners can go back and check out some of your archive episodes of Movies Over Easy. And then, like I said, when you get back up and running, which knock on wood you do soon, I can alert my listeners because it's a fun podcast to listen to.
Yeah, I appreciate
Mr. Z, I can't thank you enough. And we'll have to cross paths again.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that we have each other's contact information, I'll drop you an email once in a while.
Big thanks again to Mr. Z for joining the show. And a quick shout out to our mutual friend Scotty, who is indirectly responsible for bringing us back together after all these years. In addition to our fun top 10 list, you heard us talk briefly about the role movies may play in shaping people's opinions of justice-involved individuals. Mr. Z had a good point in noting that when dealing with the Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees type characters, then yes, clearly we know these are cartoons, if you will. But I wonder to what degree those perceptions, dare I say biases, come into play when folks think of justice-involved individuals. If you are a loyal listener to the show, you are aware that one of the things we try to do is correct some of those notions as to individuals who have been involved in the criminal justice system. Both here and through our YouTube channel, we try to dispel some of those myths. I loved getting Mr. Z's handle on that, his take rather, and also sharing our top 10 list, which if there were some sleeper picks on there that you may not have heard of, I encourage you to go back and track those down through your favorite streaming services if you're able. I have provided a link in the episode description and show notes of this show to Mr. Z's Twitter handle, which is Mr. Z Movies. Go ahead and give him a follow. And I can also announce that the Criminologist Media Group, the umbrella under which both this podcast and our sister station YouTube channel, The Criminologist, operate, now has its own Twitter handle. I encourage you to follow us on Twitter at Crim Media Group. CRM Media Group, at Crim Media Group. So there you will find the latest updates and related content for both this podcast and our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Again, that Twitter handle is Crim Media Group. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices or implementation, and of course, the topic of desistance from crime. I will leave a link in the episode description to our Paragon Group website. If you have questions and you want to contact the show directly, you can do so via email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn and follow both the Criminologist Podcast, and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. And I just mentioned our new Twitter feed, Crim Media Group. Lastly, if you have not already done so, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional content as to what you hear on this podcast. Merchandise is available. Reach out if you are interested. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the show. And of course, do so yourself if you have not already done so. And remember, folks, there's no them. There's only us.
You have to be cured. It was horrible. Of course it was horrible. Violence is a very horrible thing.
Fuck is that? For most of the guys, killing's got to be accepted. Murder was the only way that everybody stayed in line. You got out of line, you got whacked. Everybody knew the rules.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, training opportunities, or to contact the host, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Click on the Contact Us tab in the upper right-hand side of the page. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.